First of all, thank you to the organizers for the invitation to engage in this conversation on women's sacramental ministries. Last February, interested members of the Catholic Theological Society of the Philippines were invited to participate in an in-depth synodal discussion and discernment on key controversial issues, organized by the National Team on Synodality of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, or the uh, CBCP. The issues they listed were based on paragraph 15G of the synthesis report of the Synod of Bishops, namely identity and sexuality, LGBTQ, end of life, complicated marital situations, and artificial intelligence. This did not include the issue of the ordination of women to the permanent diaconate. So I raised this matter and was supported by other members of our theological society. It was eventually included in the list of topics for discernment, and thus the formation of the Women's Diaconate Group, of which I became chair and moderator. The group is composed of professional theologians and pastoral leaders, and what I will share with you is the fruit of our research and discernment. I will start with a brief introduction of our main issue, after which I will proceed to the three main parts of my presentation. The first part will focus on our theological research, the second on our pastoral research, in particular, the initial results of our ongoing nationwide survey of pastoral animators and leaders, views on women's diaconate, and lastly, the position paper we submitted to the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines. As you may know, the Instrumentum Laboris, or working document of the Synod, notes that most of the continental assemblies and the synthesis of several episcopal conferences call for the question of women's inclusion in the diaconate to be considered. Our group, which was tasked to reflect on the issue, decided to focus on the specific question: should the Church allow women to be ordained as permanent deacons? The permanent diaconate, which permits married men to be ordained as deacon, was restored in the Catholic Church in 1965 at the Second Vatican Council. The deacon's priestly role includes baptizing, distributing the Eucharist, blessing marriages, bringing the viaticum to the dying, conducting liturgies without priests, officiating at funerals and burial services, reading the gospel, and delivering the homily. Their prophetic ministry involves evangelizing, catechizing, and denouncing injustice. And their servant ministry consists of works of charity or integral development, social action, and administration of parishes in case of shortage of priests or where there exist small Christian communities like BECs, mission stations in large parishes. In the Philippines, the CBCP petitioned the Vatican for the ordination of permanent deacons only in July 2023, more than 50 years after its restoration, and it received the Vatican approval on August 17, 2023. So while other episcopal conferences have now been discussing the question of women's inclusion in the diaconate, the 2023 synthesis report of the synodal consultations in the Philippines did not even mention the issue of women deacons, and instead focused on the lack of participation of men in the church. Its main reason in the past for refusing to ordain permanent deacons, even that of male, is the fear of the clericalization of the laity. Part 1, Theological Research. Are there women deacons in the Bible? Saint Phoebe, a woman, is the only disciple explicitly referred to as deacon in the Bible. Romans 16:1 refers to her as deacon of the church in Kengrave. Phyllis Zagano, member of the first commission formed by Pope Francis to study women deacons in history, further notes that while no one claims Phoebe was sacramentally ordained, she is understood to have served in an equivalent ministry to that of the seven with masculine names called by the apostles in Acts, none of whom is called a deacon. Another reference to women deacons is found in 1 Timothy 3:8-13, which lists the qualification of deacons. Verse 11 in particular states, women likewise must be serious, not slanderers, but temperate, faithful in all things. So the term likewise means that the women functioned as deacons in the same way as the men. Now, what happened to women deacons in church history? Historical records point to the ordination of women deacons in both the Eastern and to a lesser degree the Western Church up to the 12th century. Majority of scholars maintain the sacramentality of ordination of women and its substantial equality to the male diaconate in the undivided church. Zagano claims the existence of at least one extant liturgical ceremony for ordaining both men and women deacons. But what led to the decline of women's diaconate? As adult baptism waned due to the rise of infant baptism, the primary task of the female diaconate to anoint women's bodies in baptism by immersion waned and led to women deacons' decline. In addition, Sagana's analysis of papal edicts as well as local, episcopal, synodal, conciliar, and canonical restrictions against women's participation in the liturgy demonstrates that the liturgical tasks of women ordained as deacons were eventually forbidden all women in the Western Church, and their impure state, due to menstruation, required that they be kept distant from the sacred. How can the ordination of women deacons today impact women's ministry in general? Women will not only be able to sanctify, example, baptize or witness marriages, teach, like preach the homily, but also assume governing functions in the church. Canon 129 restricts governing functions to the ordained, though it did not specify that this is limited to priestly ordination. Women deacons, following revisions in canon law, can also be appointed to positions currently restricted to clerics, such as chancellor, judge, and cardinal deacons. So, are there doctrinal reasons against the ordination of women as permanent deacons? There are no doctrinal reasons against the ordination of women as permanent deacons. In 1997, the International Theological Commission concluded their study affirming that the Church can restore the female diaconate. However, the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, refused to sign it and instead created a new committee led by his former graduate student, and these are the commission's conclusions. One, the women ordained as deaconesses were not equivalent to the men ordained as deacons. Two, the sacrament of holy orders, the priesthood, and the episcopate are clearly distinct from the diaconate. And three, pertains to the ministry of discernment in his church to pronounce authoritatively on this question. So there are two implicit arguments in this document that would preclude women's ordination to the diaconate. One is the iconic argument, that is that women cannot represent Christ. And two, the unicity of orders, which means that there is only one sacrament of holy orders. Since women cannot be ordained as priests or bishops, consequently, they cannot be ordained as deacons. Most scholars, however, would object to the above arguments as well as the fact that the Commission ignored or relegated to footnotes serious scholarship about women deacons by major scholars. Yves Congar, regarded as the single most formative influence on Vatican II, while opposed to the ordination of women to the priesthood, finds no theological objection to restoring women to the diaconate. So how can one describe the theology of the diaconate? While the theology of the diaconate is not fully developed because it has just been recently restored in the Catholic Church, its biblical roots point to the deacons as witness, reflection, or embodiment of Christ as servant in their disposition and the service they render to the Christian community, especially to the marginalized or excluded. The deacon will be leader in service. Part 2, Pastoral Research. The group has been conducting a survey in 4 languages, which commenced on February 25, 2024, and will close on May 31. The target respondents are pastoral animators, leaders who worked in dioceses, parishes with basic ecclesial communities or mission stations. This limits the interviewees to those who are grounded in pastoral life and the church's outreach to the poor, which is one of the main concerns of a deacon. Aside from this, we had consultations with various groups. But what I will be sharing with you is the result of our nationwide survey, particularly from the English respondents, which consists the vast majority of the respondents. The survey has 3 parts. First, the demographic profile. And then part one, which inquires into their current knowledge of the permanent diaconate and women. And this is supposed to serve as warm up to the issue. After after that, we have part two, no, which asks the respondents to rate their views about women's ordination to the permanent diaconate. Now, the survey is primarily conducted using a Google form shared on various Facebook pages or sent by email through a convenient sampling strategy or snowballing. And in particular cases, for those with difficulty internet on a face-to-face basis. As of March 21, 2024, we had a total of 246 respondents in the English survey. So for the demographic profile, almost 75% are from 41 to 74 years of age. Gender, almost 75% are women. State of life, religious, 41.1%. Married lay, 30.1%. Single lay, 23.6%. And only about 5% priests. Educational attainment, most are MA, PhD, and college degree holders. Location of BECs or mission station, they're mostly located in the urban areas. Location of diocese or parish. So we try to reach respondents from the three major group of islands in the Philippines, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. More than 50% of respondents come from Luzon. Focus of the BECs or the mission station, whether this is more liturgical, developmental, or liberational. More than 50% says that their BECs focus on all of the above. So I will just focus on part two of the survey, which is on the respondents' view about ordination of women to the permanent diaconate. So the statement is the church should allow women deacons in recognition of women and men's equal reception of the variety of gifts of the Spirit in baptism. Strongly agree, 80.9%. The church should allow women deacons since women religious are already doing the task of a deacon in far-flung areas. Strongly agree, 79.3%. The church should establish the ministry of women deacons but should not ordain them because only men can be ordained. The response here is divided. Strongly agree, 34.5%. Neither agree nor disagree, 19.9%. And strongly disagree or disagree, 45.6%. It is important to be absolutely certain that a woman had been ordained as a deacon in the history of the church before it allows the ordination of women as permanent deacons. Strongly agree or agree, 49.8%. 11, we should oppose ordaining women to the diaconate because the next time women will be advocating ordination of women to the priesthood. Strongly disagree, 62.4%. Allowing women to become deacons will discourage men from engaging in the ministry, and the more we shall lose the men in the church. So around 60% strongly disagree. The core problem in the refusal to grant women official leadership positions in the church is machismo or the belief in the superiority of men over women. More than 60% strongly agree. Ordaining women as deacons will only reinforce the church's clericalization. Responses are more divided, but almost 50% strongly disagree. Women with the proper formation should be allowed to preach in mass. Strongly agree, 79.7%. In being diaconally ordained, women can have the power of governance, which can help in declericalizing church structures. Strongly agree, 68.6%. So part 3, our position paper. Convergences. In discerning the issue of whether women should be ordained to the permanent diaconate, we were guided by the following. First, the scholarship of experts in history and theology is crucial, but so are the experiences, reflections, and discernment of pastoral animators and leaders who live close to the needs of the world and the church. So this is to counter those who would want to simply wait for what the Vatican experts would say. Second, while there is evidence of the ordination of women as deacons, A precedent is not important. The Holy Spirit was not working only in the past, but continues to work in the present as we discern the signs of the times. If one looks at the Council of Jerusalem, the decision not to require circumcision from Gentile Christians did not have an explicit basis in past practice, though it is implied in Jesus' inclusive teaching and practice. Third, a renewed theological anthropology undergirds this discernment. One, women and men are made in the likeness of God, and thus both can represent Christ. This is to counter the iconic argument against women ordination. Two, women and men equally receive the gift of the Holy Spirit in baptism, and thus three are called to be co-responsible in the life and mission of the church. And four, the principle of communion and inclusivity, where each one's charism or gifts are recognized, should guide how we discern women and men's roles in the church. Then we also said machismo, or the belief in the superiority of men over women based on certain stereotypes and prejudices, remains pervasive and needs to be challenged. Now, some would say that the permanent diaconate for women will inhibit men from engaging in church ministries or diminish their active participation. So this has been a recurring argument in the Philippines against women's participation in liturgical ministries, such as that of altar servers, lectorship, serving as commentators. A major concern is that women assuming these roles would discourage the men or the boys from engaging in the ministry, as what happened, they say, when women were allowed to become lectors and commentators. There is no deeper analysis of why this happened. Example, men's machismo attitude. Instead, the response is to uphold equal but complementary theological anthropology, with some roles relegated to women and others to men. Underlying this is a narrative of competition instead of a narrative of communion, where each individual's charism or gift is recognized. So we state, on the contrary, the ordination of women to the diaconate might even motivate men to be more responsible for the mission of the church. Well, the women can be their role models. Both women and men need to be open to the direction and guidance of the Spirit toward communion in mission. This should not be a competition. Ordination of women to the permanent diaconate will also allow women to share in the governing, Canon 1 to 9, teaching, and sanctifying roles in the church. Matters for consideration. So this also contains some point of divergence. The ordination of women as permanent deacons carries the risk of further reinforcing a hierarchical clerical church. Measures should be taken to prevent this. And then on the one hand, the ordination of women to the permanent diaconate can be used as a way of specifying the limits of the service of women in the church. On the other hand, it can be a way to open up a path to women's priesthood. So our proposals. In the light of a renewed theological anthropology, we recommend that the church consider ordaining women to the permanent diaconate. The service of women who are already effectively engaged in the diaconal ministry and feel called to become permanent deacons can be further strengthened, magnified by the formal recognition of their leadership by the church. We are referring here to the same argument given in the Second Vatican Council for restoring the permanent diaconate for men. Women's ordination as permanent deacons, however, has to be seen as part of the synodalization of the church, the journey towards a more inclusive and participatory church. Otherwise, this can only lead to clericalization. New wine must be put into fresh wineskins. Consequently, care should be taken that the formation of deacons is aligned with the vision of a synodal church. Now, the church acceptance of women to the permanent diaconate necessarily implies that the church will provide them the opportunity to exercise the ministry. It might be allowed by the Vatican, but the local churches might refuse to implement this, as has happened in past similar changes. Included in the ministry of deacons, which must also be accessible to qualified lay women, are the administration of a parish, Canon 517.2, and the ministry of preaching in Eucharistic celebrations. Actually, in all levels of church life, qualified lay Catholics must have the opportunity to be called to ministries and exercise legislative, executive, judicial power, as well as be appointed to magisterial office. To address the machismo culture in the church and the bigger societies, education on gender equality and justice is needed in seminaries, parishes, and dioceses. In addition, awareness raising and continuing education about permanent women deacons should be conducted. We recommend that our survey on women deacons be shared with the bishops in dioceses, parishes, with BECs, and mission stations to be circulated among their pastoral leaders on or before May 31, 2024. And lastly, the ordination of women to the permanent diaconate has to be accompanied by a renewed theology of ministry that goes beyond lay clergy distinction and instead focuses on the variety of charisms and ministries in the church. This is also a means to further declericalize the church. Thank you.